Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the final Osteoporosis Canada Cook-Along virtual cooking class in this series for 2020. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your cook-along host. We are grateful to the Winnipeg Foundation and Canola Eat Well for their partnership in this cook-along series. We are also live streaming this webinar on the Osteoporosis Canada Facebook page. So a big welcome to everyone watching on Facebook Live. This webinar will provide general information about cooking and food knowledge. It is not intended as individualized health or nutrition advice. If you have questions about nutrition, consult a physician or registered dietitian. Nutrition plays an important role in overall bone health and in preventing and managing osteoporosis. When meal planning, make dishes that contain bone-building nutrients like calcium and protein, and be sure to take a vitamin D supplement daily. In people who have healthy bones, adequate calcium intake on a daily basis is necessary to maintain bone health. You can get calcium in foods like milk, cheese, yogurt, nuts, canned salmon when you also eat the bones, vegetables like kale, bok choy, and broccoli, and legumes such as white beans, which are featured in today's recipe. Vitamin D helps to increase the absorption of calcium, ultimately building stronger bones. Fats and oils in moderation, like canola oil, which is also featured in today's recipe, aids in the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins like vitamin D. Protein is also essential to bone health and is necessary to build and repair bone tissue. Sources of protein include chicken, pork, beef, legumes, milk products, and nuts. So let's get cooking. Today's featured recipe is chicken cassoulet with 175 milligrams of calcium and 36 grams of protein per serving. You can find today's featured recipe and other recipes by visiting osteoporosis.ca/recipe. It is now my pleasure to welcome Emily Richards, a professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and cookbook author who also enjoys culinary instruction for home cooks who want to learn more and have fun in the kitchen. She is the author and co-author of 9 cookbooks, which include topics from Italian cuisine, weeknight dinners, glycemic index diets, and comfort foods. Emily writes and develops recipes for cookbooks, print, and online publications and websites that include everyday cooking and healthy eating. Please welcome Emily.
Thank you, Tracie. Hey, everybody. Just another Wednesday night in my kitchen with some friends in Winnipeg, which I'm so grateful to have cooked with. Some of you are returning, so I'm glad to see your faces, and welcome to our first timers as well. It's so nice to have you on our cook along, and we're doing a delicious chicken cassoulet tonight. And this is definitely a hearty meal, and it's great for cold weather. And it's got make-aheads, it's got vegetables, it's got protein, it's got everything that we want for a wonderful calcium-filled meal. So we are going to get started. Now, for those of you joining us on Facebook, we had a lot of chopping to do tonight. So in front of me, you'll see lots of vegetables that I've already gone ahead and chopped. And our cook-along participants have also been chopping. So they get to relax a little bit as they cook because the work's been done ahead of time. And chopping is a skill that I can't recommend highly enough. It makes cooking so much easier, and it just really gets better with practice is the best way that I can say it. So tonight, storage vegetables are a mainstay in this recipe. So we did do a lot of chopping, and I'll go through that as we cook. The first part we get to do though is cook some bacon. So we are going to be cooking in a larger Dutch oven. Now that term means a large saucepan with a lid, because we do want to cover this to help cook everything in the cassoulet itself. Now, traditionally, a cassoulet is a long, slow cook, typically cooked in a lot of fat to get really, really tender chicken. However, we are doing a weeknight version that is a little bit faster, and we're using boneless, skinless chicken thighs, one of my favorite proteins to use because it does cook so quickly. So I'm using a large shallow saucepan, and this is perfect if you have a large deep skillet. That would work here as well. What we don't want to use is a tall stock pot. And you'll see why as we are cooking, because we want it to evaporate as we're cooking to condense the flavors and make them absolutely delicious. So I'm going to turn my heat on to about medium-high heat. If you have a non-stick surface, so if you are using a large, deep non-stick skillet for this, make sure you're only going to about medium-high heat, because it's really not recommended to go to a higher heat. Mine's stainless steel, so I can go a little bit higher if I need to, provided I don't want any smoke happening. So, and I don't want my camera to stop working on me. So I'm going to be using probably medium high. So we are using sliced bacon, and I love using bacon. It is a great product to add smokiness as well as flavor. And here we want to render out the fat, because we're actually going to be using it not only to flavor our cassoulet, but to help brown our chicken. Okay, so we had about 8 slices that is going to go into my Dutch oven here. And what we want to do is crisp it up. Now, oftentimes when you start a recipe with bacon, it says to cook until crispy. And then you take it out and you add it back in and it gets soft. So what's the purpose of making it crispy? Well, the purpose is to render out that fat and to help build the flavor of the bacon itself. Now, there's a wide variety of sliced side bacon, which is what we're using tonight. And by variety, I mean it varies in the amount of fat that's in it. So if you have very streaky bacon, which has lots of fat in it, that will render out in this process. Now, you could have very lean bacon and not have a lot of that fat rendering out. And that's where all of us have our canola oil ready in the kitchen, because that will actually play a role for our lean bacon, because we will need to add some fat to make sure that our browning of the chicken goes well. Okay, so while this is cooking, I want you to be kind of stirring it, breaking it up. It is fairly easy to slice or chop sliced bacon because it's already sliced. You can just kind of cut it in thin strips and then cook it. Now, if you wanted to, you could also cook it in long slices and then take it out and crumble it up. So it's totally up to you, but I find chopping it and cooking it is a little bit easier for me. So what I do want you to have then is another bowl or plate that has some paper towel in it, because we are going to be taking the bacon out and letting it drain on the paper towel as we go through the recipe. Now, I should point out, and I know Tracy did as well, if you have any questions as we go along, our participants will definitely be welcome to unmute themselves and ask the question. But if you have any questions watching on Facebook, please feel free to comment, and we'll try to answer those questions too, perhaps about an ingredient that we're using tonight, or maybe what you're cooking at home tonight. So this bacon will vary, again, because of the water content and how fatty it is. So if you find that it looks like it's almost steaming or poaching, it could just be that it has a little bit more water in the processing of it. So not to worry, because we will be cooking it so that it does crisp up a little bit. I don't want you to worry if it's not super crispy, because as I said, we're going to be adding it back into the cassoulet itself to get soft and build up that flavor. All right, so just keep stirring that. And I want to talk a little bit about our chicken thighs. Now, this recipe is a large recipe. It includes 3 pounds of boneless, skinless chicken thighs. So one of the reasons why I love this recipe, not only is it fairly quick, and I say fairly quick as opposed to quick, just because of the sheer amounts that we're using. So it does take a little bit of time to cook it all, but the bonus is that you have enough to share. So obviously in our COVID times right now, we may not be having friends over, but there's no reason why we can't drop off something that we've made to a sick family member or someone who's had a baby, or even your mom. She might be hungry too, you know.
I'm taking mine to my neighbor, half of it to my neighbor tonight.
That's perfect. See, and that's what I love about these cook-alongs, because I think that we all want to kind of share our ideas of what we're doing at home and how we're sharing either our meals or what we're cooking, any of those types of things, which is absolutely wonderful. All right, So you can hear my pot sizzling away here with the bacon. And I have a nice little bit of fat coming out of that bacon too. Now, let's say you didn't want to use bacon. There are people that don't want to use bacon, and I get it. You don't have to. It does offer that nice smoky flavor to the cassoulet, but what you could do is omit this step entirely, so leave out the bacon and brown the chicken with some canola oil as your first step, as opposed to cooking the bacon. Or let's say you had some leftover bacon from breakfast. I know in my house, I never have leftover bacon from breakfast, but maybe you do. And you can actually do the same thing, add that cooked bacon later in the recipe and start cooking and browning the chicken in canola oil first. All right, so I'm getting a really nice coating on the bottom of my pan, and my bacon is crisping up really nicely. So our chicken thighs. When we go to the store, and in our participants' case today, DeLuca's, they got their chicken thighs delivered, which is even better. You don't really have to do anything to them. If you find that they're a little bit fatty on the side, you can remove some of that fat, but they really are wonderful and quick to use. They have no bones, they have no skin, so they'll cook really quickly. And in our case, they will stay nice and tender. Dark meat typically is a wonderful meat to showcase because it does stay nice and tender, and it's easy to incorporate into recipes. All right, so I'm going to start taking out my bacon because it has some nice color on it. And I'm also going to just reduce my heat a little bit because I don't want my bacon fat to spatter too much. So I'm going to use a slotted spoon and take out my bacon. Now, if your bacon isn't as crispy as you like, just let it cook a little bit longer. But the important part for this part of the recipe is to render out that fat, okay? Because that's what we're going to use. Now, I actually don't have a lot of fat in my pan, so you need at least a couple tablespoons of that bacon fat. So if it looks like you don't have enough, just use some of your canola oil and add another splash in there, okay? Even about a tablespoon is all you need. And this is where we're going to start browning our chicken. So I'm going to grab my tongs and I'm going to start putting it right in the pan. Now, and if you want to talk about skin side down or how you put the chicken thighs in, I actually, if these did have skin on them, that's exactly how I'm putting them down. So imagine that you're putting them skin side down. And they're not all going to fit in your pan. So we do need to do this in batches, okay, so that we leave enough space that the chicken gets a little bit of color. So I think in my pan, I might be able to get one more in here. And it will vary on the size of your chicken thighs. So the chicken thighs, if you've gone to the grocery store to pick them up, you'll know that they vary in size. They can be really, really small, or they can be fairly large. So in planning for this recipe, brown the similar size chicken thighs all together, so that they're browning kind of at the same pace. And then save the smaller ones maybe to the end, and then they'll take a little bit less time as well. So oftentimes in recipes, it'll say to brown the protein. And really what we're doing is creating that nice caramelization on the outside to build flavor and to help, in our case, build flavor in the pan as well. So we've started with that first layer of bacon, and now we're going to add the chicken layer. So just keep thinking of it as building flavors in your pan, because in the end, you want that sauce that the chicken is going to cook in to be absolutely delicious. Okay.
Emily, we have,
yes.
It's Tracie. We've got a couple of questions. Is now a good
For
time?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, super. So we have one question. The first question is, how do you feel about turkey bacon in this recipe?
Turkey bacon would work beautifully in this recipe.
Bacon?
Definitely. I actually often use turkey bacon in place of regular bacon. And because it is a leaner bacon, I start it in canola oil first, just to kind of get that nice crispness and flavor out of it, and it won't stick to the pan. And then you have the benefit of that residual oil in the pan to help brown your chicken. So that's a great substitute and a great question.
Great. And then just one more for right now. We have a question from Facebook Live, and they just wanted to confirm if there was any seasoning on the chicken before you put it into the pan.
That is another great question, and there is no seasoning that we're putting on the chicken. We are actually picking up the flavor of that brown rendered bacon fat and bacon in the pan. So we're not putting any seasoning right on the chicken. Now, if you want to, you could use some of the salt and pepper that's in the recipe, sprinkle some on. In fact, I could do it right now to show you what it would look like. So this is the salt and pepper for the recipe, and I'm just gonna sprinkle some on, okay? So you could definitely do that as well. Our seasoning in this cassoulet is coming from fresh herbs that we're gonna add a little bit later. So it's gonna have a really nice soft flavor of fresh herbs, but absolutely delicious. Now, don't worry about the chicken being completely dark golden brown. If you do let it cook that long, you're essentially going to be cooking the chicken, and in the end, it will cook faster in the end. But we really just want to kind of seal a little bit on the outside of both sides of the turkey thighs and then take them out. So they're going to be picking up some of that brown coloring from the pan and our bacon. And then you're going to, whoopsie daisy, that one jumped right out of my tongs. Have a plate, and you're going to be taking them out once these are browned. You might have a little bit of sticking happening, just that's dependent on the pan you're using, as well as how forceful you are in turning that chicken. But see all that nice brown loveliness in the pan? I love that. And then I'm going to add another batch here. I'm checking my heat because the chicken is cold as it goes in, it cools down the heat of the pan. So you will find that in your next batch, it might take a little bit of time just to heat up again. There. And that's okay. There we are. And just as a replay, I'll put a little bit of salt and pepper on these ones too. I'm not using all the salt and pepper because we're going to add it later in the recipe. All right, so we're going to let that brown up, and that's my second batch of the chicken. In the meantime, let's talk about some of these other great ingredients. So I mentioned cassoulet. It's typically a dish that takes a long time. You'll see a lot of recipes, and this actually could be done in a slow cooker as well. However, when you do it in a saucepan like this or in a Dutch oven, it builds a little bit more of an intense flavor because we're not adding more moisture to it. It's actually evaporating as we are cooking things along. I love seeing everybody's steam coming out of their pots and pans. It's awesome. But we are going to be adding some vegetables. So when you think of stews, we often think of vegetables being part of the protein. And in this, we're definitely using and referring to a lot of storage vegetables that I always have on hand because they're great recipe starters. So one of my favorite, two of my favorite ingredients are onions and garlic. And this cassoulet is not shying away from garlic. It actually has 6 cloves, and I use really big cloves of garlic. So it has a really, really wonderful flavor and aroma once you are sauteing it. If 6 cloves of garlic sounds like a lot to you, you can always hold back. But trust me, again, this is 3 pounds of chicken that we're using. So it is a hefty amount because we are using a lot of chicken. We're also using a couple of onions. And here's where oftentimes in a recipe, when you see something that calls for 2 onions or 1 onion, there's not necessarily a specification. So what that means is that it's a medium-sized onion, okay? So what's a medium-sized onion? I'm gonna show you because I have some onions here. And I'll show you a little bit of a difference. I'll see if I don't have a large onion, but this would be an example of a small onion and a medium onion. And then your large onion would be maybe the size of my hand, okay? So if a recipe calls for 2 onions, you're looking for 2 medium-sized onions. And these are just regular cooking onions. The other thing you'll see is the specification of a white onion, a yellow onion, which is just a cooking onion or onion, red onion, shallots, and there's so many varieties. Now, if you're making a recipe and you don't have just a regular cooking onion, but you have shallots, you could use that, okay? Or leeks. Leeks is a great option, and actually leeks in here would be absolutely delicious. I'm gonna turn over my chicken. I'm gonna force it a little bit. My goal is to get this done within our hour together. So I am gonna speed things up just a little bit. I didn't cook anything ahead of time, so I am forcing the chicken to turn. Not that I want you to do that. You don't have to do that. You can let it cook and relax. So before we got on all together, we were talking a little bit about size of our vegetables and comparing how big, how much we had of one or the other. So this recipe calls for 4 carrots and 2 celery stalks, or 2 ribs of celery. So basically half of each other. But again, it depends on where you are in the celery bunch. If you're further into the celery bunch, those stalks are going to be a little bit smaller, where on the outside, you're going to get those larger, thicker stalks. And that's okay. For a dish like this, our focus is the chicken and the beans that we're going to be adding later. So not to worry, those vegetables are playing part of the sauce, and an added bonus, we get some vegetables in it. And the carrots, you can get carrots that are really, really big or carrots that are small. So 4 carrots, again, will vary in size. So if you have 2 really, really large carrots, they are perfect to use for 4, okay? So I'm going to take out the rest of my chicken so that we can start cooking our vegetables. There we go. And you'll notice that when you look at the chicken, it looks like it's almost cooked. And that's, again, the benefit of using boneless, skinless chicken thighs. All right. Now, the other thing that I'm noticing is that my heat is getting very, very soft. So that means I may have to run to get another butane can, but that's okay. We're all good. Our vegetables are going in. So let's add our onion and our garlic. And what you'll notice is that you'll probably have less fat in your saucepan now, because the chicken has absorbed some of it. And that's okay, because that means that it's absorbed the flavor of the bacon, which is exactly what we were looking for. Our carrots are going in. So you can see we have lots of nice color in here. We have lots of great texture, and all that amazing garlic is going in as well. Okay. Just like that. Now what we want to do here is get a little bit of the water outside, cook it out of our vegetables. There we are. So we are going to stir this and cook out some of that liquid. So we're going to soften them while we're getting some of the water. And that's just the water that all vegetables have. Onions particularly have a little bit more, like celery, than carrots do. And what's nice about the carrots here is that they actually act as a natural sweetener, because we're using some tomatoes. Sometimes when you're using canned tomatoes, they don't taste quite as sweet. So tomatoes are a wonderful natural sweetener to use in tomato dishes. My grandmother, when she made tomato sauce, what she would do, you often hear people that will add a pinch of sugar. She would never add sugar. If she thought the tomatoes weren't the tastiest, she'd let them cook really a long time. But then she'd also add just a carrot. She'd cut up a carrot and just throw it in there. And the bonus was at the end, we got to eat the carrot, which was absolutely delicious. If you've never had carrots in tomato sauce, they're wonderful. I highly recommend it. All right, so is everybody kind of at the same point here where we're cooking our vegetables? No, everyone's still browning their chicken? That's okay.
I only have half my chicken done.
That's okay.
It's stuck to the pot too.
It's stuck to the pot. That's okay. That means it'll have more flavor in the pot. And you don't have to worry, because when we add the liquid to the pot, it will all come out of the bottom. It really just depends.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
Should I stick my other chicken in a different pot on another burner and cook it while that vegetable stuff's cooking?
You can if you want to, but you don't have to.
Yeah, I think I'll do that.
Okay,
I'll throw
that's great.
it on another pan.
You can totally do that.
Okay.
I have a question
Yes.
as well. How is that chicken meant to be fully cooked right now, or
No.
just brown? Just brown?
Just browned. We're not fully cooking the chicken at this point. We're just trying to get a little bit of the flavor of the bacon on there. So it's not fully cooked. We are adding the chicken back into our saucepan.
Okay.
Not to worry. And if some of you have smaller pots, then what you can do is, if you feel like it's not going to fit, you can just separate it out into two, and then we'll have two pots with the same ingredients essentially. Okay. So if you think that's going to work better for you, then now would be a good time to do it while you're still kind of browning the chicken. And I'm just softening my vegetables. And as I'm stirring, you'll see that it's building up more and more of that, what I like to call those wonderful brown bits. And when we add our liquid to the pot, it's going to deglaze and lift up all those brown bits to add flavor to it. Okay. There we go.
Emily.
We'll just keep stirring. Yes.
So I just invited my daughters for dinner. I'm sharing
Okay.
the recipe for 3 houses now. Can I
Oh.
just add any kind of different kind of beans? Like, can I throw in a can of whatever beans I have, like black beans or I don't know, haricot vert or whatever? Like,
You
I
could
don't know.
definitely use whatever beans that you have on hand. If they're canned beans, you're going to add them where the white beans go, so that's not
Yeah.
a problem. If it's a similar textured bean, that's probably best. So a black bean would work. A red or white kidney bean would work.
Yeah.
Lentils will be a little bit too soft, so they wouldn't be my top choice. And chickpeas are a little bit too firm. So if you have any of the other ones, you could definitely add those.
Oh, I got tons of beans. It's just a question of which one.
Well, you could add one of each and then have a different color. You'd have a tri-colored cassoulet, which is kind of nice.
Oh, that'd be fun. I love that.
All right.
idea.
So are there any other questions? I just have to see. Black-eyed peas
Oh, yeah,
would
we
be
have
perfect,
one
Maureen.
from-
Black-eyed peas are perfect.
Yes, Emily, we have
actually-
another one from Facebook Live.
Okay.
And they just want to know, so if they're concerned about sodium, could they omit the salt in the recipe?
For sure. The question about sodium, which comes up often, there's a few things that you can do when it concerns sodium. So first of all, bacon has a lot of sodium, so you can omit the bacon, okay, or use a lower sodium option for bacon, which there are some on the market, and you can omit the salt. I would leave the pepper in for a little bit of flavor. You could also then increase the fresh herbs in the recipe, which I'm going to talk about because we're going to add some of those. And the other thing you can do is, because we're using chicken broth in the recipe, you can use a no salt added or homemade chicken broth that has no salt added to it. So there's lots of options. The one that is really quite easy to do, and sometimes people don't remember, that when you go to buy your beans, there are low sodium options in canned beans. So there are no salt added varieties of beans, and they come in, so you can get white kidney beans, red kidney beans, chickpeas, and you can also purchase that. So just by doing all those things in a recipe, you bump down the sodium levels quite a bit. So hopefully that helps. Are there any other questions, Tracie?
Not from our registrants or Facebook Live right now, but just for the registrants, a reminder that at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button that you can type questions in there if you have any. So keep cooking, Emily.
All right, so I'm looking at my vegetables. They've kind of wilted, essentially. They've softened, and they're picking up a little bit of that brown color from the pan, which is totally perfect. We're going to now add a few more ingredients to help build that flavor. Another low sodium product is canned tomatoes. You can get no salt added canned tomatoes. And that's what's going to go in next, are diced tomatoes. So you can use fresh diced tomatoes in this recipe if you wanted to. Typically, when you use canned versus fresh, there's a little bit more juice in these diced canned tomatoes. So that's going to give us a little bit more sauciness. So if you're using fresh tomatoes, you'll need about 3 cups for this dish if you're chopping up fresh tomatoes. And in season or vine ripened tomatoes will give you the best flavor. And if you have a bunch of grape tomatoes that you have to use, you could just throw those in there too. They're going to give you a thicker sauce because there's, again, less juice. So I'm going to add my diced tomatoes in here. Okay, make sure that all goes in. And this is a 28-ounce can that I'm adding. And just with that little bit of juice out of the diced tomatoes, you'll notice that it'll start to break down all those wonderful bits on the bottom of the pan. And then we're going to add a few more ingredients. Okay. We are also going to add our chicken broth and some seasoning. So here is our chicken broth. Remember, we talked about how you could reduce that sodium. You can definitely do that here, or homemade chicken broth. If you didn't have chicken broth, and for some of you that are already drinking some wine tonight, you could add some wine instead. Some white wine would be lovely in here, and that little bit of acidity from the white wine would add to the dish. Or you could do half and half. You could do half a cup of white wine and half a cup of chicken broth. That would be amazing too. So I'm going to get that in there. And it's just the cup that's going in. And then we're going to add our seasonings. So our seasonings are fresh herbs. We're using fresh because I love the flavor of them, but I know that oftentimes we don't have fresh. Dried is our first option. So I'm going to just take a peek here. I do have dried rosemary and thyme. Okay, so those could be your options if you're making this dish without the fresh herbs. So I have beautiful sprigs of fresh rosemary and thyme, and we need a couple teaspoons of each. So typically what I do is just, and I'll do it with the rosemary here. I pull back on the stem, okay? And then this top part that came off has a softer stem on it. So I'm gonna chop that all. And then you end up with this kind of thicker bottom part of the rosemary stem. And the same thing would happen with the thyme, okay? When you pull it off, you end up with this thicker stem. Now, what you can do is actually save these, throw them in the freezer. They're great if you're roasting fish to put the fish on top of as a bed of fresh herbs. But in our case, because we're simmering the dish, you can actually add them right to the pot, okay? So if you wanted to, if you don't want to chop anything tonight, you can just add your whole fresh herbs in there. And how much is 2 teaspoons? In our case, if you had 3 or 4 sprigs, you could just add them all. But I'm going to do a combination of chopped and whole in here because I think it would be lovely. So I'm going to pull back on some of these stems, and then I'm just putting the stems right in the dish too, so that we get the benefit of all that flavor of the fresh herbs. I love using fresh herbs. I think that sometimes having more fresh herbs offers up a great amount of flavor. So if there's a little bit extra, that's okay. So I'm just going to chop up and I'm just chopping them together. I mix them together, my rosemary and thyme. Okay. And then I'm going to add my chopped as well as my whole herbs in there as well. Okay. How's everybody doing? Do I have any thumbs up from anybody? I see some worried faces. I see some smiles. I see some, what did I get into tonight? I do have to, yeah, I think I'm gonna have to do a quick escape, Tracie, to get another can of butane.
No problem. Okay, Emily, you go. I'm going to tell everyone
I'll be right back.
Get the recipe for tonight.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So if you're looking for tonight's recipe, you can find this recipe and other recipes on osteoporosis.ca/recipes. That's recipes with an S. If you've registered, I've also included that in the chat. You can get the link for the chicken cassoulet recipe. And if you are on Facebook Live, I have also placed it in the comments. Oh, there's Emily. She's got the butane and she's changing it. Let's take a look and see how everyone else is doing. All right, we've got Darlene who's madly stirring. There's Lorna. How's it going, Lorna? Yay, we've got thumbs up from Lorna. That's awesome. Linda, how is it going, Linda? Thumbs up from Linda. That's great. And everyone's wearing their purple unbreakable apron. They look fabulous. All right. Okay. Does anyone?
I am
wanna-
back.
Oh, there we go, Emily. Okay.
Yeah, me too. I do have a question. After you put the tomatoes in, like I've done the vegetables, I put the tomatoes in and I did the herbs, just the
Okay.
rosemary and the thyme. Is there an ingredient next that you've already put in?
No, I
I'm
haven't.
caught up. I'm caught up.
You're
Okay,
caught
good.
up. How is everyone doing? Do we have everybody caught up? I hope. Oh, I got thumbs up. That's always a good sign. Thumbs up is good. All right.
Almost still frantically cooking the rest of the other chicken.
That's okay, Lila. We won't leave you. We won't leave you. Don't worry. All right. So our fresh herbs are in. And I should point out, it's always good to have the recipe nearby. I like to think that I can remember everything. I can't. This is also why I love having everything chopped and ready to go so that I can remember to add everything. So that if there's something left behind, you can go back to the recipe and just look and say, oh, that's where it goes. So that leads me to where we are in the recipe. And we're going to add that salt and pepper and our bay leaf, okay? I know oftentimes people think that bay leaves, they're not necessary. They do actually add flavor. How many times have you had stew and you think, what is that lovely aromatic? Could be a bay leaf and you didn't even think about it. They vary in size. Sometimes they're broken. I know oftentimes I pick one out and it's broken. So because it's broken, I'll add two. Okay, it's not going to hurt the dish, I promise you. Even if you're making a stew, look, I left some fresh thyme here. I'm going to add that in there too, so that we have that to go. And then my salt is going to go in here too, and pepper, sorry. And I'm just using black pepper. I use fresh ground pepper, so I grind it before I measure it out and use it. And if you take a look at this lovely sauce, it's very much full of vegetables and flavor. And I'm going to give it a stir, and then I'm going to get you to, you have to look fast, but every time I pull back on this, you can't really tell, but a lot of those brown bits that we started out with have lifted up, and that flavor has gone right into our sauce. So what we want to do is bring this to the boil.
Emily, I have a question.
Yes, yes.
I only got a little tiny stick of fresh thyme. Can I add some like dry thyme in as well, or should I?
Yes. Yeah, you definitely can. You can add some of your dried thyme. So in the recipe, it calls for 2 teaspoons of fresh. And if you chopped it and you only got, let's say, half a teaspoon, you could add another half a teaspoon of dried thyme. If you got even less than that, you can add a full teaspoon of thyme. So hopefully that helps, Dawn. Okay, awesome. Is there another question? Darlene, do you have a question?
Have you added the chicken broth?
Yes, you can add the chicken broth as well.
Okay, okay, good.
Add your chicken broth and then bring it to the boil. And then this is where we're going to nestle our chicken back in. So we did that initial browning step. And now we're going to put the chicken back in because this is where it finishes cooking. Okay. So I want to make sure, yeah. I'm going to put my chicken in first, but we also have to put in our beans and our bacon at this point. So I'm going to slip my chicken in first. And you don't have to, you can place it in one by one, or you could just literally dump it all in because that will be the same. But what you'll notice is as the chicken sat, there'll be some juices in your plate. And I'll show you by tilting it. You want to make sure you get those juices in there because that has a more flavor that we want in that cassoulet. Okay. So just kind of, they don't have to be in a single layer. They can kind of be one on top of each other like mine. That's fine. And now we're going to add also that cooked bacon that we had sitting off to the side. So that's going to get a little bit more flavor in there for us. And we're going to add our beans. Now I only drained 1 can of beans. I haven't drained my other can. And it is a good idea when you're using canned beans to drain and rinse them. It's very rare now that you'll see recipes that ask you to use the packing liquid of the beans as well. I remember a long time ago, there was a great chili recipe that I used to make, and you would use the packing liquid of the beans. And it would kind of give you a very beany taste, but it would also be very salty. So by draining and rinsing the beans, it helps kind of just remove that saltiness in the canning liquid of the beans, just to give them a brighter flavor. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my can of beans and just go to the sink. I'm just using a strainer. You can use a colander, and then just rinse it under cold water. Not that it matters. It doesn't have to be cold, but just give it a rinse. And then I like to just make sure I get all the beans out of the can. Okay. And we're using white kidney beans, or you could use cannellini beans, which is just a smaller version of a white bean. Navy beans would work really well here as well. But as we talked about earlier with Lorna, you can use any bean that has that similar texture. So here's where some of you may not have thought calcium exists in beans, in particular white beans. And these white kidney beans are going to offer up more protein, which jacks up our protein, right? For 36 grams of protein. Not only is it our chicken, our beans are in there too, and some fiber. Always great. We have lots of vegetables in here, but we're also adding those beans that will bump up our fiber as well. Okay, so 2 cans of beans. And what I love about beans in stew type recipes like this is they actually play a role very similar to potatoes. So if you think of your favorite beef stew, for example, that has potatoes in it, they soften and the starch comes out and gives it almost a creamy texture. These white beans replicate that just in a different way. So I'm going to add my 2 cans of beans in there. So I have a nice big, you can see how full my pot is. And this is where you can kind of take the time to give it a little stir. And you don't really have to be gentle with the chicken because, again, they're whole pieces, they're whole thighs there. Okay. But what I do want to do is just make sure that I'm coating everything with that flavorful sauce and vegetable mixture that we have. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to now cover it. I have to get the lid. The whole Dutch oven part comes into play now. On goes my lid. Now you don't get to peek. So depending on how browned your chicken is, if you got a really good golden brown color on it and it looks like it's almost cooked through, this is where the timing of this will vary, because what we want to do is make sure our chicken is fully cooked and no longer pink inside. So typically when it comes to using dark pieces of chicken, you take a look, you want the juices to run clear and no longer pink inside, but it is typically a darker color. So that's something that you have to be aware of. The other thing that you can do is have your instant read thermometer handy so that you can test the chicken for doneness, and you want it to be 165. So I'll have my thermometer out here just in case as it's cooking away. Now we're not done yet. We still have to do the breadcrumb topping, which is my favorite part. And I think this is what makes this dish a little bit more special, is our breadcrumb topping. So if you haven't already, which I know I haven't, I'm just gonna pop my butter in the microwave. Just to melt it. And we're tonight using a combination of butter, melted butter, and canola oil. And why would we do that? It's actually a classic kitchen tool or kitchen ingredient or method of cooking by incorporating butter and oil. We're going to get the flavor of butter in there, but we're also going to get the benefit of the oil that will offer up a nice crispness and let the flavor of the cheese and butter showcase in this breadcrumb topping, which is perfect. Now, if you wanted to reduce the saturated fat even more, you could use all canola oil in this recipe. So for our recipe, you would use 4 tablespoons of canola oil in its entirety. Or if you forgot to melt that butter and you just want to keep going, you could use all canola oil for it, okay? So I think my butter is melted. It is. I'm going to get my canola oil to add. And we're adding some Parmesan cheese for flavor and for color. And also, again, another hit of freshness. We are going to be using some chopped parsley, which of course I didn't chop. So I'm going to chop it up. We need about half a cup. So because this is such a large dish, we're using 3 cups of fresh breadcrumbs. And fresh breadcrumbs, for those of you that have been on the cook along before, know that fresh breadcrumbs are from bread. They're not fresh, dry breadcrumbs. Dry breadcrumbs in this dish would be kind of, what would be the best way to describe it? Crumbly, dry. What we're looking for is a nice, crisp, fresh texture to the breadcrumb topping. So I like to use just sliced bread, hot dog buns, hamburger buns, English muffins will work. And I put them in my food processor, pulse them up to get a really nice, fresh breadcrumb. So when you squeeze your breadcrumb, it still stays together. So that's a sign of a great fresh breadcrumb. Now, if you think that you have to do this every time, you don't. You can just do a bunch up in your food processor and then freeze it. I usually freeze it in the bag that I use. This is a hot dog bun bag. And I just put it in the freezer so that next time I need fresh breadcrumbs, they'll be ready to go. All right, so there's my chopped parsley going in. How's everyone doing? Are we working on our breadcrumb topping? I see some people working heavy duty. That's perfect. And I'm also going to add, I'm going to toss my parsley there. I'm going to add my Parmesan cheese. Now, if you wanted to, if there was a dairy allergy, you could leave out this cheese, but you might be thinking that's the only place that we're getting the calcium from. We're not actually. This, again, I'm going to mention it because I think it's important and a little bit surprising for people. Each serving has 175 milligrams of calcium, which the only dairy that you might think of is this cheese that we're using and maybe the butter, but that's really limited. In fact, nil. So we're actually benefiting from the calcium of all the other ingredients that we've used, like those white beans that really add so much more to this dish: texture, flavor, fiber, and calcium. Now, our Parmesan here, if you didn't have Parmesan, you could use Asiago, would be really nice. Pecorino Romano would be lovely. Or you could just leave it out entirely because that breadcrumb is really going to offer up a lovely flavor and texture. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of canola oil to my butter here before I toss it all together. And again, what's great about this combination is that it will offer up the texture and a little bit of flavor. So it's a great combination to use for breadcrumb coatings. Or toppings, sorry. I'm going to get a spoon here. Tracie, how are we doing for questions? Are there any questions?
Oh, we do. We have a couple. I was waiting though, because I know you're going through that recipe, and I don't want to interrupt her again. So here, I'm gonna go back a little bit to the chicken part because we have a question from someone. It's kind of a 2-part question. So, could someone use a different cut of chicken, like a chicken breast, but also what if they cut it all up in bite-sized pieces first? What would that do to the recipe?
So yes, you can use chicken breast. And if I was using chicken breast, I would cut it up into small pieces. And what that will do is also speed up the length of time it takes to cook. So with chicken breast, I would look at about 2-inch chunks that I would cut it in. I would still brown it because I think that still benefits. And with chicken breast, you have to make sure, oh, you don't have to, you hope to make sure that you don't overcook it so that you end up with that nice, juicy chicken that we all want. You have a little bit of leeway when you're using dark meat like chicken thighs. So when if you cook it a little bit longer, that's okay. So in any case, the other option you can use here is a boneless, skinless turkey breast. And I, again, cut it up into about 2-inch pieces, brown it, and you can use it in here. Now, the other thing you might want to do, and this is totally going kind of off recipe, but I think it's valid to point out, is that, oh, I love your red pot, Ellen. I wish I had one of those. And the other thing that is not in the recipe, but you could totally do this, is You could cook the bacon and then add all your vegetables to the pot. And then what you can do is where you return the chicken back into the pot, you can use leftovers. So if you have leftover chicken, leftover turkey, you can add it there and then continue on with the recipe so that it just heats through and you have the benefit. It shortens the recipe a little bit as well. So see what happens when you cook together as a team. You come up with all these great ideas. I'm going to add my oil and butter mixture now. Tracie, was there another question? Yes.
I have one
Yeah.
too. Can I
Oh,
ask
sorry,
one?
you go ahead. No, you go ahead
Yeah.
first.
Are my like tendencies to want to peek in my Dutch oven? Are you to stir it or peek in it or just let it be?
I trust my Dutch oven. I'm not peeking. You are allowed to peek though.
Okay.
And this is where I would really recommend it, is if you have a thinner pot, because the thickness of the pot will vary how quick it cooks. So if you have if you don't have a thick base on the bottom of your pot where you're worried that it's going to scald or burn, then definitely get in there and stir. If you have a thicker pot, and if you have a cast iron pot, for example, the heat will retain much longer, so you don't have to necessarily cook it at a higher heat. But you want it to be not at a rolling boil, but a nice simmer is perfect. You can see some steam coming out of mine, and that's okay. And that's where you can reduce it. But this is not it's not a souffle, so you don't have to worry about going in there and peeking because nothing will deflate. So that's totally okay. So I've mixed up my breadcrumb mixture here. Okay, and that's ready to go. And I am going to open this pot and see what's inside.
Emily,
Yes.
can I please ask you how much, because I missed this, how much canola oil are you adding to this butter?
2 tablespoons.
Ah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to open up my Dutch oven and take a peek and see what's going on here. I do need a... There we go. I don't feel anything sticking at the bottom, so we're good. Okay, but this is where I am going to see where my chicken is at. And by where my chicken is at, I mean is how cooked is it? So I always have my thermometer handy. You can also taste your vegetables, see how soft they are. I'm not looking for a really, really soft because we're not doing a long cook on this, but you want them to be nice and tender. Okay, I'm gonna get my thermometer here and give the chicken a little poke. So I usually look for a thicker part of the chicken in the thigh. So kind of this side looks a little bit thicker to me. And then I'm piercing it in the center. And I'm gonna show you what it does here. It's cooked. All right. So that means I can continue on with the recipe. Now you can see that it's not super saucy, but that's okay. That's what makes this a great dish to freeze, because we haven't talked about that part yet. So I'm gonna just turn this off. I know the chicken's done, okay? And there's lots of options at this point. If you don't want any of this breadcrumb coating, you didn't have to make it, by the way, but you can actually eat this right now. Surprise, you don't have to continue on with the recipe. This is delicious as is. You can serve this with, I'm a carboholic. Those of you that have been here before know that. Mashed potatoes and beans, one of my favorites. So you can serve this over mashed potatoes, over pasta, over rice. It's absolutely delicious. Or just cook up some green beans alongside and you have a double bean dish. It's absolutely delicious. But we're actually going to continue on and make this cassoulet a little bit more traditional and add that breadcrumb topping. So here's where you can freeze some for later or share with your neighbor or another family member. You can put this in a really large 9x13 casserole dish or baking dish, or you can use 2 smaller ones. I'm going to use foil dishes because I know these are perfect for the freezer for me, and they are a little bit bigger. If you're dividing it into two 9-inch or 11x7-inch pans are good, or a good size. Mine are a little bit bigger, but that's okay. If you are worried about sticking, this is where your canola cooking spray will come out. I'll grab mine. So that when it goes into the freezer and goes to reheat, you won't have anything sticking. So I'm just gonna give it a light spray here.
What if your dish is very soupy?
It's okay, don't worry.
I have lots of liquid in mine.
Like
That's
super lots of liquid.
okay. So
It's
what
like
you
a
can
soup.
do is, if you're worried, well, you could serve it as a soup. There's one thing. If you want to, what you can do is actually take your lid off and let it cook a little bit longer and let that liquid evaporate. So why is there more liquid in yours and not mine? It's all a matter of the chicken and the vegetables, okay? And here's why. Depending on the size of those onions, and some of you showed me your onions earlier, they were a little bit bigger. There's a lot of liquid in those onions. And there's a lot of liquid in chicken in the processing. So what ends up happening as you cook it, that liquid comes out and adds to the dish itself. Now, if you taste it and it has lots of flavor already, it's okay that it has that extra liquid, because we're going to be putting the breadcrumb topping on. That bread actually helps absorb some of that liquid as well. If you want, as I said, you can just let it cook a little bit longer with the lid off, and it will evaporate and condense a little bit and produce a little bit of a stronger flavor and reduce that liquid. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I sense worry in your voices, so that's okay. I want you to relax about it.
Emily, what is the temperature on the digital thermometer we are going for here? So you say
165.
165, thanks.
Yes, yeah, and make sure you go in the center of the thicker part of the chicken thigh. If you have a larger chicken thigh in your mix, definitely look for that one, because that's the one you want to gauge all of them by, because that's the one that needs to be cooked. Because the smaller ones will obviously be cooked if the larger one is. I don't want to see sweat on anyone's brow. I want you to relax. Wednesday night, chicken cassoulet night. Tracie, do we have any other questions before I start spooning this out?
Well, you know what? You start spooning and I can kind of put the questions, because I know we've got a lot of questions and I'm not sure we're going to be able to get to all of them. But
Okay.
So here's one. Could somebody, we've talked about freezing a little bit, but you know, if we can freeze this, but could somebody make this a day ahead?
That's a great question. And yes, you totally can. You, in fact, can make this a day ahead up to this point, and put it in your dish. Don't put the breadcrumb topping on it. Put it in a dish and let it cool just to room temperature. So within an hour, so it should cool down enough that you can wrap it and put it in your refrigerator. You don't want to put it in super hot, because then it just brings down the temperature of your refrigerator and everything in it. And if you can, put it up near the bottom of your refrigerator, because that's typically the coolest point, coolest part of your refrigerator. So that's the best place for it. And then you can definitely take it out the next day, and you'll notice that it's thicker because it's cold, but also because the starch and the beans have been given the opportunity to kind of relax and chill out. You can put your breadcrumb topping on. You can actually make the breadcrumb topping and stick that in the fridge as well, and then just put it on when you go to bake it in the oven the next day. So yes, you can do that. I'm going to take out the chicken first and divide it, because that's the easiest part. I think I had like 12 pieces of chicken. So I'm going to see if I divide it 6 and 6. Yes.
If you're going to freeze a dish, like would it work if you put some of the breadcrumb mixture in like a freezer bag and just froze it with it? Is that?
Yes, you totally could.
Okay.
Yeah. The reason why I don't freeze it with it right on top is because you need to kind of warm it through first before adding those breadcrumb toppings. I tested it both ways, and I felt that it was crisper by adding it later once it actually was warmed through. Because from frozen, so it's also adding more water from that whole freezing process, so the bread doesn't kind of stay as crispy and flavorful, if that makes sense.
It does. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I have two questions. One is, if I don't have a thermometer, how would I know when my chicken is done? And then the other one is, I missed it back. Were we supposed to use these stems from our parsley or no?
Two great questions. So to check your chicken without a thermometer, what you can do is actually just take one of the thighs out And you can just make a little cut in it, make sure the juices are running clear and that it's no longer pink inside. So that's how you're going to test the chicken. And then for the parsley stems, you could have added them into the stew, but we didn't really talk about that. But you can actually just save those parsley stems and throw them in the freezer. And then you can use them next time you make a soup or a sauce. I love putting mine in my tomato sauce just to add flavor, or use them as a base. Wow, that looks awesome. You can also use it as a base when you're roasting fish. That looks amazing. I love that dish.
This is my neighbor, my family, leftovers. Brilliant. Thanks, Em.
Oh, well, you're welcome. Thank you. Lorna, when are you starting your cook along? You're going to have to do it for your neighbors. Maureen, did that help you? I hope that answered your questions. I don't want to leave you hanging there with the chicken.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Awesome. All right, so I'm just, and I'm not taking out my herbs. I threw them in there whole. I'm just putting them right into my pan. 2, 4, oh, I guess I had more than 12 pieces of chicken. I think I may have had 14. So this is also
Emily,
where
I'm gonna
you
do
can.
a pot-a-thon.
A pot-a-thon?
Yeah, so you can pot with Lorna. It's gonna be my new thing, pot with Lorna.
That could be taken in many different ways.
I know, that's why I like it so much.
Lila, how are you doing?
Well, I got it all into this giant casserole dish, but it's pretty sloppy and wet. So are the crumbs still going to be okay on top of that? The wet? Okay, good, thanks.
They will. So
all right, I'm ready to put the crumbs on.
Perfect. I'm gonna catch up to you because I'm not there yet. Okay. I'm gonna spoon my bean and vegetable mixture out. So the one thing is with cassoulet is that it's not meant to be a really dry dish. That said, as it sits, it does thicken up and get a little bit drier. So that's why making it ahead or freezing it is perfect, okay? The breadcrumbs will absorb, it is a lot, it's 3 cups of breadcrumbs, but this is meant to be eaten with more bread, believe it or not. So the beans are in there, the breadcrumb topping is on there, but this is so delicious with crusty bread dipped into it. You're gonna love it. All right, so I'm just spreading everything around here. I'm gonna take this pot and do this so that I can get, now, I want you to find your bay leaves and take those out if you can find them. It's always a good idea to take them out. I found one. I had put 2 in here, but the other one may just have to stay in there. That was the broken one. So I'll take, oh, there, I found it. There it is. And I'll take that bigger rosemary stem out too. Okay, so now I just want to point out, if we can pop over to my saucepan just for a minute, I want to show you that all that lovely brown bits, they're gone. See, they're all gone. All that flavor is in our cassoulet, and that's exactly what we wanted. And now I'm going to put my breadcrumb topping on one because the other one is going to go in the fridge. So only use half. Okay, and then I have my broiler on, and I'm going to pop this in my broiler, and I'm going to move this because I'm hoping that you'll be able to see. Don't look at my dirty oven, but I want you to see where I'm putting this dish. Okay, so my broiler is up here, and my rack is down at the bottom. It's about 6 inches away, 4 to 6 inches away from the actual heating surface. Because if it's too close, your breadcrumbs are going to burn and they won't have time. This is also where more of that liquid's going to evaporate a little bit as it's under your broiler. Now, if you don't feel comfortable using your broiler or you don't have a broiler, you can actually just put this at a 400 or 425 degree oven and let it become nice and golden brown on its own. Okay, it'll take a little bit longer, but that will ensure that you get a nice even golden brown color on it, as opposed to that kind of dark brown, dare I say, burnt breadcrumb topping, because nobody wants that. So that's only going to take a few minutes, and then I'll bring it out to show you. But the other one thing I wanted to talk about, we talked about canned beans. You can also use dried beans and make them yourself and use them in this recipe. So I have a couple here. I have red kidney beans and black-eyed peas. Soak them. You can do a quick soak, and I usually just put them in a pot of water and cook them for about 2 to 3 minutes to rehydrate them, drain them, and then cook them for about 40 minutes. Depends on how old your dried beans are. Sometimes when they've been sitting around, oh, wow, Lila, that looks great. Sometimes if your dried beans have been around for a long time, they're gonna take a long time to cook. So that's another option to use for the recipe. Some of you are like way ahead of me. I gotta come closer to the screen. We're running behind, Tracie. I'm so sorry.
That is okay. This is great. That is great. This is great. And everyone looks like they're doing a fabulous job.
I love, Jen, your pot. I love your pot too. You guys have great cookware. I love it. This is so nice. Oh, that's perfect. Look, they all look great. Jackie, that looks great in your casserole dish.
Question about my pot, Emily. If it's an oven safe Dutch oven, can you just take out your other portions and then go right into the oven with what you've got?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. If you do have an oven safe pot, cast iron or stainless, that you feel comfortable putting in the oven, you could just put your breadcrumbs on top. Now, obviously, if it's deeper, you're not going to get a good distribution of the breadcrumbs, but that's okay. But yes, you could definitely put it in your oven. Sandra, how are you doing over there? Is yours going into the casserole dish?
Yep, I'm just broiling. It's under the broiler right now.
Awesome. I should probably check mine too. I tend to walk away sometimes, and that's not so smart. Yep. Here's the perfect reason why you don't walk away from your broiler. I will show you as the smoke comes emanating out of. This is what happens. I get too involved in what everybody else is doing. But that's okay. It'll still be delicious. Remember I was talking about that nice golden brown crust that you want on it? Yeah, this is a little too golden brown. Exhibit A, what you don't want to do. That's okay. It'll be extra crispy. It's not completely, it's just dark golden brown, that's all. I'll put another one in so that I can show you the golden brown color. There we go. That's a good example. Is that one going in the broiler? Dawn, is that one going in the broiler or is that one out of the broiler? This time I can't forget about it. Tracie, remind me that it's in here.
Okay, I'm timing you.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Yes, this recipe is great for our family because I still feed a house full of people, and this will be all eaten up tonight. So thanks so much.
Oh, perfect, Dawn. I'm so glad to hear. Oh, I love that casserole dish. It's one to wash, one to wear.
It sure is. One of those ones you just can't part with.
No, definitely not. Tracie, did we have any more questions while I try not to over brown my?
Hey, check it, Emily. All right, you know what? While you're checking that, we've got time only, unfortunately, for one more question. So,
okay.
Is it possible if somebody wanted to mix up the proteins a little bit, like use chicken and maybe another protein? What would you suggest if that's possible?
I would choose, you can combine any protein really, as long as it's kind of the same density and thickness is what you're looking for. So let's say chicken thighs and pork chops, but I would not use the pork loin chops because those are a little bit leaner than chicken thighs. So I would keep that into account here. I'm going to put it in this camera because then it might be easier to take a look at the more golden brown version of the casserole when you pay attention. And but definitely chicken and turkey would go together really nicely. So if I was using chicken breast and turkey breast, or you could use chicken thighs and turkey thighs. turkey thighs, you can't buy them boneless, skinless, but they're very easy to do on your own. Just take the skin off and cut the one thigh bone out, and you can use those and just cut them up so that they're similar sizes and so that they're cooking at the same time. So hopefully that helps. And don't forget, you have the bonus of a plant protein here with the beans, as well as our chicken, the other protein. So together, it's a great combination as well.
Emily, I just want to say thank you. This has been so fantastic. I've had a blast. We've eaten well, and oh my goodness, they look really great. So my neighbors are going to be happy. My kids are going to be happy. Thank you.
Thank
This
you,
is
Lord. I'm
perfect.
so glad.
Perfect.
Everything looks great, you guys.
Yes,
Very
thank
happy.
you. It's delicious.
Oh,
Linda,
thank
how did
you.
yours turn out?
Two
Linda,
thumbs
did
up.
yours turn out oh, good.
Mine's
Perfect.
great. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank
Oh, you're
you very
welcome.
much. Thank
Thank you
you.
guys for joining me, and I hope that you get to feed yourselves and a few other people tonight.
Okay, let's see.
Oh my
Okay,
goodness. Tonight. So
is
they're looking
it,
forward-
where is
All
it?
right, everyone. Well, listen,
I know it's-
we're having so much fun, but we're over time. And
Oh, no,
we
I
need
didn't
to wrap it up.
Sure. I was gonna share.
So I just want to thank all of you. You look like you did an amazing job. Thank you to Emily for doing an amazing cook along. For tools and resources to help you manage your bone health, visit osteoporosis.ca. You can use the calculate your calcium tool. You can, as my picture is missing off the slide, you can visit our recipe section to get today's featured recipe. And other recipes, we have lots of other recipes featuring bone building nutrients. You can also take the Know Your Risk quiz, and you can also view the recorded version of this and other webinars, including the previous 3 cook-alongs that we did on the OC replay page. This webinar will be available in the next 48 hours, and that's at osteoporosis.ca. And of course, we need to thank our partners, because without our partners, we would not have been able to make this cook-along series happen in Winnipeg. So thank you to the Winnipeg Foundation and Canola Eat Well. We had so much fun learning about different ways and different ingredients of cooking with bone building nutrients. And while we learn to cook along together, thank you also to our wonderful presenter, Emily Richards, and DeLuca's in Winnipeg for their grocery delivery. Now, the Cook Along series is done for 2020. Today was the last Cook Along, but we have one final cooking demonstration webinar with our partner thinkbeef.ca, and of course with Emily, who will be hosting that on December 1st. And we're going to be featuring a stuffed holiday beef roast. Given COVID, we may not be able to celebrate the holidays in the same way this year like we normally would, but we can still make sure to get the bone building nutrients we need and make meals that maybe are a little more festive, like the featured recipe, stuffed holiday beef roast. Now, to register for this, you can visit osteoporosis.ca/cooking demo, or you can visit our website and just subscribe to the national newsletter, and you'll be able to receive notifications about future webinars and other information, and that will come directly to your inbox. So again, thank you to our great group of participants. You are truly wonderful chefs. Many of you who have been with us for all 4 weeks. I hope you enjoyed these virtual classes. To everyone who registered to watch online and on Facebook Live, thank you for joining us. And please be sure to stay safe, stay connected by following Osteoporosis Canada on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And we will see you again. Take care, everyone, and have a good night and enjoy your dinner.